What does it mean to live creatively? Not just in what you make, but how you move, and how you dress, and how you build your world.
What does it mean to feel at home in your space, in your skin, in your purpose?
Welcome to the Maroon Life, our lives in full color, a podcast where we explore the art of creative living from the way we style our homes to the stories we wear on our backs.
We're your co-hosts, Adrian Franks,
Nicole A. Taylor.
Two lifelong creators, curators, and culture seekers on a mission to make space for freedom, joy, and design that speaks.
We tap into soulful conversations about joy, design, self-expression, home renovation, and everything in between. Wow, can you believe it? We finally did it.
Yeah, I mean, we're here. That's what we're doing.
Here, the Maroon Life podcast, our lives in full color.
That's right. That's right. We're here. We're doing a thing. And, you know, we've been talking about doing a podcast now for the betterment of, 20 years?
Oh, my gosh. Not 20 years.
Yeah, it's 20 years. The first time podcasts were a thing on actual iPods. How about that, right?
Oh, my gosh. Can you believe that we didn't keep all our original iPods?
Well, I kept mine. I kept the first one.
All right, we gotta roll it back. We gotta roll it back for people who are tuning in for the first time to the first episode of Maroon Life, Our Lives in Full Color. We gotta introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
My name is Nicole A. Taylor. The simple version of who I am is I am a storyteller, a cookbook author, a food writer, producer, a mother and a wife. And I'm a person who I definitely live my life in color. My home, the way I dress, it says, hello, I'm here.
Okay.
And who are you? Who are you? Who are you?
Well,
who is
who
this
am I?
person?
Well, everybody know me. I go by AD. My government name is Adrian Franks. My artist name is AD Frank, but all those things are a combination of just, my lifelong journey as a creative. I'm 48. I'm from Atlanta. Pretty much been an artist my entire life. So out of those 48 years, I would say about 42 of those years has been me being a creative, right? Me drawing on a wall for the first time. Me learning how to use design in high school. Me going to college and studying the trade of advertising and design. Me becoming a actual designer and art director over the last 20, 30 years, learning how to be an inventor, learning how to be a visual artist, me becoming a podcast host, not just with the pod that me and you're doing, but other pods I've done. Me just being a creative entrepreneurial type person. So I feel like that's been like my lifelong journey. Starting from Atlanta, here in New York, now just going worldwide with this.
It's funny you said, so everyone knows me.
You do?
I think you do know a lot of people. I must say, you are the person that we can show up in a completely different country and you'll bump into someone you know.
My friend Vic said that, and God bless her. That was like a running joke.
That is so you. But what I think is going to be great about this podcast is people are going to get a deeper understanding of who we are as individuals and how we live our lives as partners in crime, partners in life. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited. And so the first question that I want to kind of explore that I don't feel like we've explored it together, but like, what does the word or the phrase intentional space for living mean for me, for you, and for us together? Like, you always hear, let's have intentions. Let's create an intentional space. But what does that mean? And also, do you remember the first intentional space or intentional home that you created for yourself? Or it could be intentional for you, like creative studio or art space.
Well, I mean, when you ask that question about intentional space, I instantly think about this idea of design, because design is intent of outcomes. I would say that first time I created something that was intentional, like in terms of a space, would be when I was like, I don't know, as a kid, building the ideal of an outdoor dwelling. We call them tree houses, or we call them like cool spaces to park your bike. But when it came to my, I guess, overall art and like ideas around just being creative, I would say my bedroom was like that very first thing. You think about it as a kid.
Yeah.
Everybody put the Right On posters on the wall.
Right
For
On
me,
magazine.
I personally like The Source because I was kind of like a hip hop snob. Definitely my first time I put my drawing table that my mom bought me as a teenager in that space was like very intentional because I want to have a place where I can kind of obviously sleep as well as create. And mind you, I got 5 siblings, so having an intentional space to create wasn't always like, accessible because, there's a lot of us. But having that space, creating that space as a very young homie in Atlanta, that was like, I would say my bedroom first.
Okay, so we got to rewind it back. You said something. You said drawing table, and that drawing table, when you bring that up, there are a lot of regret. There's a lot of happy memories around it for you and a lot of regrets. Tell us about the drawing table. Tell us about the first time you remember it being unpacked and it was in your room and using it. And I am lucky enough that I actually got to see the drawing table.
Yeah, well, that drawing table wasn't necessarily unpacked. It was brought home by my mom. And I think at the time she had a car, but it was in the shop. It was being worked on. But she brought it home on the bus.
Wow.
Right? The 34 Gresham, to be more specific.
Ha.
Yeah, this is when we was living in South DeKalb. Well, some say East Atlanta. But she brought it home. It was a folding drawing table. So it was one of those things that adjusts. You can fold it and collapse it. It makes it pretty easy to maneuver. But it wasn't like super light, right? So she brought that home on a bus. I remember her bringing it to when we lived on Yukon. And I brought it into my room. Or was it Mary Lou? I think it was Yukon. I brought it into my room and I unfolded and I started instantly customizing it to what I want. I need a lamp. I needed like these trays to put my drawing pencils. At the time I was airbrushing, so I would sometimes turn this thing into an easel. So there was that. That was the experience. Now, my biggest regret around that table is that I used it for like, up until like my mid 30s. I mean, my late 20s, actually.
Yeah.
My first apartment, I had it in my first apartment as a young adult.
And when we moved to New York, you had already moved. So, okay, I got to back up and say this to explain to people. I love how you just told this story. And like you have so many Atlanta Easter eggs. You literally just name buses and streets that are straight Atlanta.
But you got to be from there to get that.
So Adrian and I met in Atlanta, and I actually had an opportunity to see this table because when we moved in together, he brought the table. The house that we were living in at the time had this beautiful sunroom where it's all windows. So Adrian set up a studio there, and that was the table that he used in there. And so I got to see like the airbrush stains. Mm-hmm. It was a really beautiful table. And when we moved here to New York in 2008, I said, "What do you want me to do with this drawing table?" Because you had moved up here already,
right? And
you were like, "Oh, you can get rid of it."
Yeah, I had to let it go, unfortunately, because I was like,
I
should have just put it back in storage. That's what.
Yeah, I mean, because there are two things. Speaking of design and intent, there are two things that I think about. I think about that table when we moved here in 2008, and we had to get rid of so many things. I got rid of stacks upon stacks
of magazines,
right? And they were magazines I had from the 90s and the 80s. Mm-hmm. I have always been a lover of magazines. And when I think about my first intentional space, one of the things that I think about putting words on my wall, like ripping out magazines, my favorite magazine pages, and like posting them on my wall. That's what I remember the most. I didn't get my own room till I was like in the 6th grade. I don't know what age you are in the 6th grade. I shared a room with
10 or 11, something like that.
Okay, like 10 or 11. So I shared a room with my aunts. I was living with my aunts them up until then. And then I moved in with my mom and I had my own room. And I remember having a day bed, which is so funny because when I got an adult and we got an extra room, I bought a day bed. I have this thing with day beds.
I see.
Yeah, I had a day bed. I remember that. It was a tiny room. My mom was living in an A-frame apartment, and I thought it was so weird. But now I'm like, oh, we lived in a 2-bedroom A-frame apartment. It was literally shaped like an A-frame. It looked like a cabin of sorts.
Right.
I had one tiny window, and I had a desk, And I remember wanting an electric typewriter. But what I most remember on the walls were I would cut out quotes from like Les Brown, Malcolm X, and then I would have like magazines, stuff from magazines that I would put on the wall. I don't remember the posters, but I remember having quotes. So I have this thing even now where every single day I essentially pull a quote.
Yeah, you post it on the gram.
I post it on the gram, but even if I don't post it on the gram, I send it to you, I send it to friends, or I just read it to myself. So, yeah, that's kind of my room was that intentional space. And then when I went off to college, I kind of did that same thing of posting stuff on my wardrobe door. But what I remember the most is my obsession with Martha Stewart bedding collection from Kmart.
Oh, really? Martha
Yes,
Stewart.
I had a black and white, like striped seersucker bedding set that I got from Kmart. And so when I moved into my dorm, this actually was my sophomore year. And so I was in a suite with 4 other women, and not like the bunk bed things like my freshman year, but I would say in college, that's when I knew for certain that I had created a space with intention for myself. And not only was it for myself, but people love being in my room.
Yeah, I kind of had that whole Kool-Aid room hangout in Adrian's spot. I guess because I was the youngest, but also I think my room was the most creative, and probably was the first, depending on, how old I was at the time. I either had like all my siblings in the house or a few of us, because, we kind of came in waves and people moving out, right? So I guess by the time I was a teenager, having my own room, or when I was like 10 or 12 or preteen, my older siblings have already moved out, and, it's left the twins, and it's like my younger sibling. We are now like, all living together. And yeah, it's like my room was more or less the same thing.
Well, let's talk about what was in the room. Like, okay, so we know you had your drawing table,
posters. I had my other like kind of cool figurines, like collectible toys, right? Like some would say, this is long before
collecting toys then too.
Yeah. I was all into collecting like manga toys, and not just McFarlane toys. That was before that, right? But I was into collecting like novelty things, right? So that could be like a cool glove or like a certain kind of like garment, because I was the kind of person too. I would like change up my own wear, like how some of my garments that I would wear to school, I would actually kind of embellish them and change them up a little bit. So I have those things hanging up. I have obviously tons of magazines just like you, as well as like just other cool tchotchke kind of things, or like collectibles overall. So my room was like a creative black nerd kid room, essentially.
It's one thing I'm surprised you haven't said.
And music too. I was a lot of, well, you're not talking, depending on what age you're saying, right? Like at the time, it was tapes. Because, CDs.
Oh, my God.
I didn't have a lot of CDs in the 80s. But
did you have a Discman?
Oh, yeah, I had 2. I had like a gray one. I had the yellow one that was waterproof. And I would borrow my brother's, Discman as well. So I had a series of Discman and, a boom box. Yeah,
we should talk. One of the things that we have in common, although you are the true music connoisseur. I mean, I always had some kind of stereo music system in my room where I listened to the radio, like FM, AM radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I also remember you could buy like cassette tapes, but they were singles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember doing that. And I remember the first CD that I owned that I'm going to assume that I bought or somebody bought it for me. It was SWV's CD. And I had a blue Discman. But I remember that was the first CD I owned. So as early as the 6th grade, music was always around. And I used to, my best friend at the time and I think other kids used to do this too, write lyrics down to the songs.
I think certain kids wrote down lyrics. I wasn't big into lyrics as much. I was big into like the harmony and the melodies because I was in a band.
Yeah.
But I think girls in particular, and that's not the gender norm out here, but norming us. Whatever. But I think in most cases, most of the time the girls will already know the lyrics to any song. They just would, you know?
So I would have in the room, of course, the music. and the lyrics. And another thing that I've always kept, I always had a journal. I have my journals from, I think the high school ones I might have gotten rid of.
Yeah.
I have my, what they call date book, a calendar book from high school. But yeah, those are the things that I had, and I start every morning.
Right.
And
My
at
journal's
night
my
with
sketchbook.
music. Did you start your day with music?
I would start my day either with music or morning cartoons because I was I'm an artist, so I wanted to see something cool and visual. But if I didn't start the day with the music, then some of my siblings would.
All right, let's move to like adulthood.
Yeah, early adult, right?
Yeah, early adulthood. Your first apartment. I think we both got our first apartments. We were still in college, or at least still in our early 20s.
Yeah, I got my first apartment at 21. Because why try to rush out and get it? In college, I was still living at home because my school was the Cab Tech, so I would catch the bus home every day, right? Just to come home from college. I didn't stay on campus. It was, it was a community college, but it was paid for, so whatever. But yeah, when I became an adult, after I finished my internship and started taking my full-time job as a directory artist. Yeah, I moved to Cranbrook Apartments off La Vista Road. And they're no longer there anymore, but that was my very first apartment. Me and my sister Antonine, we were roommates. And, my niece Hope was obviously my other roommate. But yeah, my goal was to create a space, not just for the three of us, but for my, a place to hang out, right? Like all my creative friends, other cousins like Gerald and, Earl and other creative friends that I've met along the way from college and just in Atlanta at the time. I want to create a space that we can just hang out, right? We can cook, we can listen to music, because music was a big thing. Like my cousin, Marquez, we call him Fez, love him dearly, God bless him. Man, he brought over the 100-disc CD changer, right? And that was huge back then. So you're now talking each CD got more or less 10 to 12 songs, 100 CDs, this is 1,000 songs at at your disposal, right? Your fingertips. So we hooked it up to the speaker. So it was like all about music. Kind of like a little small concert hall. Rest in peace,
Fez. So Fez was into music like that
big
too.
time. I mean, wow. You're talking 90s.
So was it in the black like zippable thing that you would keep in the car?
Nah. He literally had a big 100-disc changer, kind of something you will hook up to like an amplifier and speakers.
Oh wow!
And you can open up the front and literally load up 100 CDs, and you can see 100 CDs in this changer. And you can control the remote and it will play like music for like hours, And in the back in my room, I obviously had my computer and my easel. In the living room, it was that 100-disc changer with the TV and the.
So you had a creative space.
I did, right? Yeah. I wanted to create a communal space. Like even that trunk that held the TV, well, that's the same trunk that's inside of the Maroon now. In our bedroom, like that's the same one.
Wait. We gotta do a whole episode. We unpack the trunk, this brown trunk that we still have that Adrian brought when we moved in. That was over 20 years ago. So you had this trunk in the first apartment?
I did.
Whoa. Okay. We got to do a whole episode.
That trunk was hideous.
But we have to do it's a Foot Locker brown trunk. Let's trunk. Yeah. We got to do a whole episode on that. Yeah. Okay. So, wow. You had a whole creative studio then.
Yeah.
The disc changer definitely gives me creative. The easel. So that same drawing table you had in there.
Yeah.
And
my mom gave me a couch, which was great.
So, and also too, I've heard this story before, but you always had the latest and greatest computer. What kind of computer you had?
Oh, I had a Performer 1300 Macintosh.
Oh.
Yeah, I knew that name and all of that. It's a 3100 actually, not a 1300. It's a 3100 Performer PC Macintosh computer.
Interesting.
Yeah. All long before you little creators of today was into Macs. Professional creatives, we all had Macs, and they was pretty expensive back then. But yeah, I bought that computer, I think like my third or fourth check from becoming a full-time designer, director at Bell South. But mind you, even in college, I had to have a computer, so I had a Mac.
Yeah, I will have to say
high school.
I didn't. How can I say this? Describe myself as creative until you came into the picture, until we started dating, because I had a little rinky-dink computer.
Yeah,
but I will say though,
terrible.
The inklings and the evidence of me being a creative person were around. My first apartment, I cannot think of the name of them. They were off Six Flags Drive. Literally, you could throw a rock. Huh? No, it wasn't Douglasville.
Okay.
It was basically the next exit after Six Flags, but it was not a Douglasville address. I can't even remember the name of it. But I moved off campus and I had all these twists and turns. I was supposed to have a roommate. I can see her and I know her name just very clearly. At the last minute, she was like, no, my dad said he didn't think it was a good idea that I would be roommates with someone.
Oh, really?
So, yes. And so she is like an attorney now. She went to Howard. We lost touch. Maybe we were friends on Facebook anyway. But I always think about what if we had become roommates. But I moved by myself off Six Flags Drive. I had a 1-bedroom apartment. I had a car. There were a lot of Atlanta University students. I graduated from Clark Atlanta University, but there were a lot of students in this complex that attended the Atlanta University Center. And you couldn't tell me nothing because I had what I remember most about this apartment. Obviously, I had a couch that was in my home house garage. And I had like shampooed the couch. It was like a pull-out couch. I remember renting a U-Haul and bringing it to Atlanta. So
both our moms gave us our first couch.
Yeah, gave us the first couch. And the lamps that we have in the Maroon house, our house in Athens. That
came from your mom, right?
That came from my home house too. The house that I grew up with, my mom and my 2 aunts. I got it out of the garage and I've literally had those lamps. I've had those lamps like 30 some years and they had them before. I've changed them, I've had them rewired, but yeah, those 2 things. But I remember going to Pier One. Oh my gosh. I was obsessed with Pier One. And what I remember, I had some, I guess people call them melamine dishes from Pier One.
Right.
They were green and I had the napkin holders and I set up my dining room table with this beautiful, what I thought was beautiful, it was beautiful. Let me say now, I thought beautiful servingware and plateware from Pier One. And between that and my obsession with collecting recipes from newspapers and magazines, those were the early inklings that I was definitely a culinary creative. But I was serious about having my apartment look adult-like. But now when I think about it, I was like, oh.
Well, you're young, right?
Yeah.
Adult is relative. You're going off what you know. And I know for me, my first apartment was more about these salons, right? I was inspired by everything from like Love Jones. Because, Love Jones at the time, right? That was like the film out at the time. So for me, I think your apartment seems like it was definitely set up for like, these salons around eating. Whereas for me, it was more about the salons around, poetry readings, showing art, showing creative ideas, sharing ideas. And, even the minimal amount of furniture I had in my first apartment was intentional because I wanted to feel more like a studio space, a space that we all can move around and you can display or you can do some type of performative. Like my very first apartment in Cranbrook, people read poetry, people sang songs. It was, like I said, a creative space. And I wanted my gathering to feel like these cool salons than just parties,
Yeah, I wasn't there yet, but the inklings were there. Yeah. I definitely would gather people around food. I'd love to have people over. And I remember having a party and this Morehouse, a guy from our hometown who graduated from the same high school as me, who's now like a big time civil rights attorney that I actually see in like all of these big Black Lives Matter civil rights cases. I see him in the background. I have some like old school photos, like real photos, not cell phone photos of us being at that
like printouts, on film.
Yes, that I probably took to CVS or Dwayne Reed,
right? Well,
or CVS.
Dwayne Reed wasn't in.
Dwayne, and printed out, and we had a party there, and I remember that party, but I definitely back then knew that I had the ability to bring people together, and there was always going to be food and drinks. Right.
I mean, it's funny because even my first couch, it was the one my mom gave me, but I also got like, a futon that I can turn into like a couch and even my bedroom. So I still even wanted my bedroom to be like a private studio.
Interesting.
Even though the futon would turn into like a bed or a chair. So I was kind of always into like this design modular furniture that can kind of be repurposed for multiple usage, What are the learnings what are like some of the takeaways you can think of If you think about like, your first spot to your current dwelling, like what were some of the learnings that you probably, pulled from that and that inspired like a
That's a
new
good
way of
question.
living?
I think the biggest learning when I look back on that was probably like 1998, is that you'll grow. Nothing stays the same. The people who are around you at the moment, they may be still in your life. They may sadly have passed away, or they may have been at that one party and you haven't seen them since.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? But that who you are, at a moment is not who you're going to be 20, 10, or 5 years from now. And your style will change, but it will stay the same because I still have those lamps.
Hey, I still got that trunk.
Ah.
Right? But that trunk did morph into a better looking trunk. Like I said, it was busted, but it was still sturdy. But I put some care and love into it and transformed it to make it look more, up to date, rehabbed it, and it's a lot more functional, thanks to my cousin, Gerald Sr.
What does that trunk symbolize?
Oh, it symbolized connections. I was able to store art supplies in it at first. Now it stores linen and bed linen and even towels. But it definitely feels like a capsule. It says connections from my first apartment to my current living house down in Athens, and even what
you
we
had
have here in New
CDs
York.
in it at one point too.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. All my CDs were in that trunk when we first met, because I had like 500 some CDs, and I had like multiple levels of like music in it. So I had CDs, I had a few tapes, no albums, because albums kind of came back in the last 15 years or so. But yeah, all my music was in that trunk at one point in time, and everybody know, hey, if you wanted some dope music, hey, go to Adrian's trunk, because that's where it's located.
Oh, wow.
If it wasn't in the car, it was definitely in the trunk. So yeah, shout outs to the trunk. So that trunk is
we're gonna do a whole episode on the trunk and the lamps.
But I do think the learnings I pull from is that you're right, that nothing stays the same, but you do have to kind of look at, how can you improve your living space from one location in your life to a physical location to the next, right? It went from the small apartment to a bigger apartment with more roommates. I went from an apartment with roommates to I got a loft apartment off Ponce de Leon at the Ford factory. Went from that to, at some point, me and you start, crashing together. And then, we got married and then moved to New York from a house to a smaller dwelling. But I think the learnings from all of those different spaces, that wherever you land, you want to create something that's meaningful, something that's inviting, and something that's comfortable, and something that actually bring your personality to life, whatever you may be. For me, it's art and design. For you, it's definitely started out with, things around culinary and friends and games, because you were big into the games, right?
Yeah, I need to bring that back. I'm so happy about this podcast because it's funny. It took us 20 years to do this. We've been talking about we need to have our dear friends on here, Gabrielle Fulton Ponder and Greg Ponder, to talk about when you mentioned the word podcast. We're like, what's a podcast? But I'm excited about this because, behind the scenes, we're like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do it? And we've done it.
Yeah.
We're doing it. And we got so much to talk about, so much to share with people. And we want people to get inspired by this, to really just kind of live their life in full color, to look at the past, to see the things that they have around them that tell a story. I think for us, we've identified that the trunk and the trunk definitely, the trunk trumps,
there you go.
The trunk trumps my lamps for sure in terms of storytelling. But this is what we want this podcast to do, to be fun, to show our personalities. So many people like, y'all need a reality show. We're like,
I never do a reality show.
But this is the closest we're going to get. And this is a podcast, The Maroon Lives. The Maroon Life.
That's right.
Our Lives in Color. The first episode.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. Tune in for future episodes. We're going to be recording, how we feel. We're creators.
Yeah.
I don't like to be over dedicating to things, but we want to make sure that whatever we put out is quality. So yeah, just be checking back and checking all the things on IG. But we want this series of like conversations and just this audio experience to feel unique, authentic, and just cool quality. And at some point we may bring in some guests, but we want you guys to hear our perspective of how we've been marooning our entire lives, really.
Yeah, that's how we live. Prior to being together, it was very much intentional.
True.
It was very much about honoring our ancestors, honoring ourselves, and looking towards the future, and really making our places like a safe haven.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we got together, it just so happened that that's how both of our worlds already were. So, yeah, man, we did this thing.
That's what's up.
All right, guys, click subscribe, and we'll be back soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Maroon Life, where creativity meets culture and joy. Part of the Caffeine Media Network. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen.